This episode is sponsored by Shutterstock.com with over 20 million high-quality stock photos, illustrations, vectors, and video clips. Shutterstock helps you take your creative projects to the next level. For 30% off your new account, go to Shutterstock.com and use offer code GAMEBREAKER5. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 2 of Unicorn Duck Shadow Puppet for June 3rd, 2013. You're watching Gamebreaker. I'm Gary Gannon. Coming up on today's show, we still have a ton to talk about from last week that we didn't get on in episode 1. Reddit is really good at making bullet points, and Carbine are taking gathering to the next level. All that and more, but first, of course, editor-in-chief over at Zam.com, Mr. Scott Hawks. How are you, sir?
I'm well. How are you?
Excellent. Ready for some UDSP?
Always.
And joining us, as always, Mr. Farhan Siddiqui. How are you, sir?
Doing well.
Excellent. Ready to talk about some WildStar-ish. All right, so first up this week, it's a podcast called The Opposition. The Opposition interviewed a few Carbine devs, and who's typing?
Sorry.
Tippity tap mute. So the Opposition podcast, they interviewed a few of the Carbine devs, and Reddit gave us a lot of bullet points. Lots of bullet points. Talking like, did you guys see the bullet points? Like dozens.
There's lots of bullet points.
There's lots of bullet points.
Many bullet points.
Yes.
They're multiplying as I was reading.
We didn't get to these on last week's show. That was our hour and a half show last week, and we couldn't get those in. So, all right, let's talk about some of them this week. So first up, tab targeting is possible, even though freeform targeting is going to be more effective. So tab targeting doesn't ensure that you'll hit the target. It just aims you at it, which is a very, very interesting way to do tab targeting because we are not used to that. It sounds like you're just gonna like throw your ability at the target, but if it's moving around and all, you're gonna miss it. It doesn't really lead the target.
So it sort of centers your freeform targeting, your telegraph right at it, and then once it fires, if they keep moving, then it might miss once they get out.
It'll put you in the right direction, but you need to fine tune it a little to make sure it hits.
This
if you
is
want,
awesome.
so tab targeting is basically it's an assistance if you need it, but if you don't, you're going to be more effective. You're quick on the draw, your skill shot style use of your abilities.
Yeah, so it seems like most serious players are definitely not going to be using tab targeting. I mean, unless a mob in like PvE is running straight at you, then it'll probably work okay. But besides that, I can't imagine many instances where this is going to work really well. I don't know. I mean, maybe you have a chance to do it. I guess, you know what it's probably really good for, though? It's probably really good for new players, maybe coming into the genre, like not really used to MMOs, and they could use the tab targeting to kind of like lead them a little bit. But as they grow and they learn what's more effective, they'll ease out of it and get into more of the combat action sort of like MMO feel.
And more importantly, well, not more importantly, but also very importantly, I think it's for people who are used to playing an MMO where all they've done is tab targeting. So they're just used to instinctively tab targeting. So having it there for them as kind of a transitional phase for them with the game, so they can tab target and it'll help you, so it's still there, but you need to basically learn how to wean yourself off it eventually to be as precise as you need to be. This is the way it sounds, anyway.
Farhan, how do you think this is going to fare off in PvP?
I think it'll be really cool in PvP because now all of a sudden you have to mobility becomes a lot more important when you have to start leading opponents because if you can get out just without having to necessarily waste your dodges, because I think dodge still has a charge system sort of like the Wars 2 does. You don't want to have to waste it all the time. So if you are just a faster character in general, then that becomes pretty important. It also means that for like a line telegraph, which is the one that I've seen the most, like with the Esper, they have like the telekinetic strike ability that just shoots a bunch of swords and things straight forward. if you're pretty far away from the enemy, like you're at max range, then it's very easy to just sort of walk out of that if you're moving, unless the other person's leading, but it becomes much harder to lead. So then that means that the Esper might not necessarily want to stay at max range all the time. So it gives you a lot more depth.
You cannot cast spells mid jump for most spells. I should say most spells. There are a few exceptions here. I don't know if we know the particulars on the exceptions, but all I can think of is how awesome is this going to be with double jump for the exceptions.
Yes.
Again,
you want to be able to drop bricks on people, don't you, in double jump? You want to throw rocks in mid double jump.
Double jump, cast brick on your face. I don't know, jump off a cliff, pull out, your target, double jump back to the ground. I don't know. Could be kind of crazy.
One thing that
Roadrunner Wile E. Coyote style sort of ability, where you go off the edge of a cliff and then jump back onto it again. That's it.
One thing that'll be interesting is that in PvE at least, when you have the freeform targeting, I believe that at least for some mob abilities, you can jump over them, so you can actually use double jump because it's a telegraph. So there is like a Z-axis kind of thing where you can jump over like a beam or something that was seen in the movement dev speak video that they did. But in PvP, what they've said is that they don't want it to be like bunny hopping all the time. So Z-axis is ignored in PvP. So freeform targeting will be doable in PvP. Just because you don't have to worry about like do I aim up and down. You've got 2 axes, not 3.
Interesting. So no auto attack in the game. No auto attack. What do you guys think of this? Fan of it? I'm not a fan of auto attack. I'm a fan of them having no auto attack. I like doing stuff while I'm playing.
I like that you have to be engaged in what you're doing, pretty much. You can't just, I'll just leave myself hitting the bottom on auto attack and go and get a sandwich sort of thing. You have to be present. You have to be making choices all of the time on what you're doing. I mean, even if it's the choice to hit right click every second or two when it's off cooldown, but you have to be active and to be doing something.
Yeah, I'm kind of over the boring days of auto attack. I'm not really a fan of it, but there is a basic attack that's mapped to your right click, but the difference sounds as though it triggers the global cooldown, which is not an auto attack by any means because they've added that in there. So little sort of slight negative reinforcer to actually play the game like, in an action
Crazy.
sort of.
Actually play the game when you're in combat. Whatever will I think of next?
What do you guys think? I mean, crowd control. So crowd control, this is CC is always a big controversial topic in a lot of games, and sometimes it makes games awesome, and sometimes it absolutely ruins games. They're not ruling it out, but currently there are no diminishing returns on CC, which is definitely making some people a little bit nervous.
Sure, but they've got kind of, it's kind of the opposite of diminishing returns in a different way. Instead of just CC in general having diminishing returns, what it is, you can have a buff that's called interrupt armor, and it applies a certain amount of resistance to crowd control. And basically, if you're hit with crowd control, this is the last time I checked anyway, the mechanic, is that if you've got enough of your interrupt armor left, it reduces it, but doesn't apply the CC. If you've got no interrupt armor left after the CC lands on you for whatever value it is of CC, then it applies the CC. But then you still have the way they described it as all CC, like hard CC, is like a prison, and they want you to have an active way to get out of it. So there's called
breakouts.
Oh, breakouts. Sorry, that's it. Yeah. So you've got the breakout system where every kind of CC there is a way for you to actively get out of it, even though that might be immediate, and it means that you've got to divert your attention from doing whatever you wanted to do to get out of the CC. So it's an active thing, and it's about making choices again at the right times. So CC is more of it's not a passive thing where, okay, I've just got to stand here for a certain amount of time, and either I can, if I'd got diminishing returns, I'd either it just not work at all, or it would. In this way, either you need to have a buff that someone can put on you, and it's got a certain value to it for a certain amount of time, depending on the CC that lands, and you have breakout, which means that you can actively, like, there's an example, the example we've seen so far, the most obvious one, is when there was a disarm, and the breakout for it is to get to the weapon, basically. To do a dash, get the weapon, then you're back. But after a while, if you didn't, it would come back to your hand. So every type of CC, hard CC, has a breakout, and there's the interrupt armor sort of buff that you can use. And they want to really use that because I think they can do some interesting stuff in raiding encounters as well with it.
So do we know, on the interrupt armor ability, is that something that only certain classes can have? Is it going to be some sort of, everyone is going to have access to this to cast this on their group, or is it going to be one particular class?
I don't think we know any details on exactly which classes have access to it, but I imagine it's going to be something where particularly healers are going to be able to put it onto their bar. So that's going to be a choice that you have to make. You know, do you want to spend one of your limited action slots on something that's going to add interrupt armor? And this is also like a mob mechanic too. So one of the reasons I think that they first implemented interrupt armor in the first place was so that in PvE a lot of the time, you know, bosses are immune to CC because, you know, if you can just keep stunning them, then that's going to trivialize the encounter. So what they've done instead is they've made it so that you have to like coordinate with your team and burn down the interrupt armor, and then apply like a useful CC to the mob after the interrupt armor has gone down. So you might like have a bunch of different players in a raid, like call out, you know, okay, you know, burn your cheap CCs now, and then you know you get them all down to hammer down on the interrupt armor till it gets to 0, and then you can apply like a powerful CC to the boss. So that becomes neat.
That sounds really interesting.
And it's definitely going to be something that's really going to be important, I think, in arena PvP. You're going to need to be able to coordinate to be like, okay, you know, I have to do a strong heal, quickly put some interrupt armor on me so I can get this off and save you. And then alternatively, like, oh, you know, that person has interrupt armor, you know, quickly either stop using CC or use more CC. And I think that's going to be one of the first things that I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to get a mod that will put a big number over the person's head so I know exactly how much interrupt armor is on them. If that's not already in there.
There's I think they've been said that there's a bar that you see that shows you how much interrupt armor is left on it, and then like it decreases as it's whittling away. And I'm sure there'll be mods that make sure that it's even bigger and more obvious.
It's not. I missed this. I just want to clarify this. I missed this. On interrupt armor, is it known as is the cooldown base? Is it on like a timer cooldown, or is it actually on like a combat sort of cooldown? Like the more like sort of combat you take and more damage you take, it starts diminishing down.
I think that it has some sort of a duration probably, but I mean this is speculation a little bit, but I know that it has charges. So essentially, like you might cast a spell that gives a person 3 interrupt armor, and then that'll eat up 3 CCs, and it might even be so complex that some CCs will take out more than 1 interrupt armor off the enemy. We don't know exactly how that works, but at the very least, you could say that it's a charge-based thing where you apply a buff that has charges, and then CC takes off charges of that. When you get to 0 interrupt armor, the CC applies. Think
of it like basically a crowd control shield that you can deplete by attacking it and wearing it down.
Very interesting. So yeah, like the example you were talking about, so how you're only going to be disarmed until you literally pick your weapon back up, right? Which could be, I assume is going to be super quick. So basically, the example that we've seen is that they knock your weapon out of your hand pretty much. And that isn't a disarmed like status effect. But so then you got to basically dash, try and pick your weapon back up, which I assume could be fairly quickly if you have some sort of dash.
Well, they did say that it would have a duration as well, so it's not like you have to necessarily pick it up. Like, let's say it falls off a cliff, or like it goes into like some fire or something. Like, I mean, I don't know if that can actually even happen, but I can imagine it happening. And if it did happen, like, you could say that, okay, maybe you can't go get it right away. Maybe it's in a telegraph, you know, for instance. You can't go grab it right away. Then it will come back to you, but if you want to do it quicker, then they give you the option of being able to do that.
Although it would be great.
Somebody in chat room they want to be able to steal your weapon as they disarm it before you can pick it up. That would be awesome.
Well, they said what you can do is, this was, I don't know whether it'll be in the game, of course, we'll see, but they said that what you might want to do is you disarm your foe and say his sword's behind you. Then you are going to try and block that person from getting to their sword to make sure the full duration of the disarm happens. One of the devs mentioned something about blocking them being able to get to it. So if you did the disarm and then say if you've depleted their CC down, then you can maybe put a stun on them and that'll stop them getting to it, or just somehow stopping them from being able to immediately get back to that. So you've got a tactical decision to make then. Okay, I've disarmed them. I can give them the chance to go and do that and just shoot at them or do whatever I'm going to do. Or I can actively make that my main priority at the moment to keep them away from the weapon and focus on that. Although I have to say, if you had this sword go off the cliff and it was just hovering there, I want to see someone jump after it and fall off the cliff.
Sounds like there's going to be some interesting PvP going on. We know that WildStar has a really strong Trinity system, which isn't really big news. I'm sure most people watching this show know that. But how do you guys feel about it in WildStar? Like, what do you guys feel about the Trinity in general? So, last year, this time, it was all in fashion to hate the Trinity, right? Like, everybody was we're against the Trinity. We hate the Trinity. And then, 8 months later, people were like, I miss the Trinity.
I've got no problem with games that go for something that isn't the Trinity, and I've spoken about this on a show. Used to do a little while back. And I've spoken about this, as long as there are different types of roles to make sure that everybody's doing something through a combat instead, and they're all actively engaged in it in ways that matter and are dependent on each other to make that sort of interlocking skill gameplay happen. That means that it matters who you're in the group with. If you're just doing things, you just happen to be doing things in the same room as other people, that's not really interesting gameplay. What the Trinity does, it ensures that you have that kind of interlocking interaction between different skill sets and players while you're on the same boss. So everybody has a role that they're clear on. They're all dependent on each other. If you're a tank, it's going to be you might be able to defeat the boss, but it's going to take you forever to knock it down. So having a DPS is good, because then they can knock the damage down. Or having a healer there to keep you up long enough and so on. So the three of them intermesh well. So I think it's just the reason that it's gone on for the Trinity's gone on for so well, it works. And I think there are alternatives. There are definitely alternatives. But they haven't been as perfected as well as the Trinity has.
Baron, where do you sit on this?
One of the things that the Trinity, like the drawbacks of having the Trinity, I think, was that getting into a full made group, because they're very specific about exactly what your group composition should be. You need to have your one tank, your one healer, and 3 DPS, usually with a 5-person group. Then one of the drawbacks I think of having that is that getting your group together can be a little bit difficult. Mm-hmm. I do hope that at least so far, there's 4 out of 6 classes that have been revealed, and I do believe that those 4 that have been revealed so far are hybrids, meaning that you can either choose to be a tank or DPS or a healer DPS, depending on the class. So I hope that they keep that up with the remaining 2, and we don't end up with a pure DPS class, just because I think that'll help the Trinity's sort of drawback of having a little bit of a more difficult time. It'll still be really important because, especially, we were talking last week about how specialization is really tied to gear. So now you can't just change your spec to heal or something and then have sort of half geared and barely do something. You're gonna need that healing gear in order to pull it off, even if you change your skills around.
Yeah, and this is something our producer facepalmed at. So right now, currently in the game, swapping specs is actually super easy for players. But the feedback that apparently Carbine is receiving from the players is making them second guess this, which is interesting, right? I mean, it sums up exactly how people are kind of the community, I think, is very divided on how some of these things work like this. So I don't know. Should you be able to switch really quickly? Or should you make it kind of difficult?
It's a little more complicated for WildStar's case just because of the way that their specialization system works. If they don't have a straight-up talent tree, then what does exactly do they mean by, we're re-looking how easy it is to change? because if what they mean is because you have to purchase abilities, I think, like as you level up, you're sort of choosing which abilities you have to go into your limited action set. So if that's what they mean by respecing, like you're changing your abilities out, then I think that should be pretty easy. But if it's something else, then it's hard to really know exactly.
Do we have any insight, Scott, as of now, of how easy it is currently?
Not particularly, because if I ask people about that, they'll be breaking NDA mainly.
Oh, that's true.
So, no, I mean, as far as we know, is one, you can change your roles, as we talked about last week, through the milestones, switching your gear out, ramping your attributes up between one way or the other. There's the primary or secondary assets for your class. So it's down to that and how easy it is to switch the abilities around, as you're saying, that are directly affected by those. So it's about switching out gear to get your passives and everything that are going to make you tankier or hit heavier, and switch out the abilities that are going to be focused on doing those roles. So right now, I'm not really sure how easy it is. Apparently, it's pretty on the fly from the feedback if they're concerned about it. But personally, I like the idea of you having that choice of it being something that's situational, that you can really switch in and out. Because if you're going to make raids as complicated and as hardcore as they've talked about, one way of doing that is having it so you need players who really know when to switch in and out of different roles on the fly as the encounter's progressing. And that's one way to be really challenging and test if your players really know how to play your class.
I kind of sit on the fence about this one because I know a lot of players really like to switch out these days. I don't know. I guess I'm old school. I kind of like the old school. I kind of like being locked in a little bit and having to sort of like build a group properly and then like going in and doing some of these things. And if it doesn't really work out because you've kind of screwed up your group, like you're kind of a little bit screwed, And I don't know. I think that helps to going along with the lines of what you always talk about, Scott, is your community and your guild and the group of people that you play with. I think it's really, I remember like, when you first start, it's like almost like crafting, right? When you first get into an MMO and if you're with a static group, it's like everybody divvies up like who's going to do what. And you kind of become interdependent on each other. And I sort of feel like that's the same way with with even class systems. Like if you make it super easy where people are just like flipping out on the fly and it's like, I don't know, maybe I don't want to learn like 2, 3, 4 classes to play one game,
Sure. I think it's a double-edged sword. I understand perfectly that, and it's like for me, usually I play a tank, and I want to be the best tank. I'm not really interested in playing DPS. It's true. I like tanking. I like to perfect me as a tank in that situation. However, if anybody's tried putting together a 20 to 40 man raid before, and you've got the problem of making sure you've got the right balance of classes, if you're fixed into those with no sort of ability to switch in and out, it can be problematic. And what you end up doing is saying, "Oh, we've got to try and recruit that type." When if you can switch between them a bit more, then you're a bit more flexible. You can have players who can come on and play. Okay, you might not be you might not love DPS and you might prefer healing, and you're the other way around. But for this encounter, we need you to switch back and forth, and then it makes it easier.
And we don't need an uber tank, but we need a mediocre DPS. And as long as you can kind of like help us out, we're gonna be fine. I get it. No, I get it. There's pros and cons to both. It's just I don't know. I'm not an altaholic, and I don't actually play a lot of classes. I usually like make a character. I usually make a couple of characters at the beginning of it, figure out what I like, and then I stick with it. And I just go with that. And I don't really learn them all, which is like interesting. Well, I know a lot of players like to play everything.
Again, like I think that part of specializing is because it's split between how you set up your skills and how you set up your items. Because of that split, I don't think it'll be that easy to suddenly switch from tank to DPS or DPS to tank, because you're going to have to build up both item sets, right, in order to actually be able to successfully do that. So I think you could specialize in one. I think what they mean when they say that they're rethinking, making it too easy, I think they're talking about how easy it is to change your limited action set or some other sort of choice that maybe they haven't revealed yet.
Yeah, maybe it's sort of like a dual system or something where you have access to both, but you have to make the decisions maybe outside of the dungeon, like when you're putting your composition together. Like, hey, you can flip them. Okay, got this. Once you go in, maybe you're locked to that or something.
You could even just do it when you're not in combat. You could just say you can't switch armor while you're in combat, and if you do that, it means basically you can't switch roles. Because if it's completely attribute dependent on what role you're playing, if you can't switch your armor, you're stuck. You're in that unless you do a complete hybrid gear set, and then we haven't seen yet, but there's a good chance you're not going to get your attributes up high enough to really feel the benefit of the different role you're trying to get to. So. I think there's ways around it. I think there's ways that it can be flexible enough that you can have composition that's good, that you can try different roles out if you want. But if you're worried about people being able to like switch on the fly in mid combat and that's scaring a bit too much, that there are ways, as I said, if you just make it so well you can't change gear while in combat, then that should pretty much make you're stuck in it for that fight.
All right, well, you brought up tanks, and I want to talk about how tanks will be important in PvP. But first, I want to tell you guys about Shutterstock. If you guys have not checked out Shutterstock, you go to shutterstock.com today and make a brand new account and use promo code Gamebreaker5. We're going to get yourself 30% off. I want to show you guys something really interesting today. I haven't shown this off yet on any of the shows, but this is really cool. So this is one of the tools over at Shutterstock, and it's called Spectrum. And it's actually really awesome. Like, let's say you're building a website or something, or you've got a project. And let's say maybe you've got, I don't know, maybe you've got like, you know, like a sort of a theme. And maybe you want to kind of like have like sort of a color palette, let's just say, right? So Spectrum is, you go right on the front page there, and it brings you over to this nice little UI here. And basically, you can put a keyword in here. Like, let's just say, I don't know, let's go with castle, because we're all about fantasy. And you put castle in there. And then you say, I kind of have this, like, blue thing kind of going on, right? Like winter. You just slide this around, and it just updates and brings you all these amazing images that you can just, like, flip through by color palette and by keyword. And it's actually, it's awesome. I've used it a ton, actually, just for inspiration of trying to, like, maybe you don't know what your design should be, and you kind of got an idea, but you don't really know which direction it should go in. And this is an awesome way to just kind of come in and find some stuff that's that really could inspire you to reskin your website or change it, or just find some really cool artwork and stuff, like, you know, like. And all of a sudden you find this guy and you're like, I'm home. I found it. I mean, look, it's awesome. It's like awesome concept kind of art. That's actually really cool. That's actually really cool. But check it out. Go over to shutterstock.com. Sign up today for a brand new account and use promo code Gamebreaker5. Going to get yourself 30% off. I do not know how long this is going to last with the 30% off, because it's the most they've ever given off. So go check it out, and make sure to check out Shutterstock, the Spectrum. It's up here. There's another tool as well. Well, I'll show this on some other shows. It's called Instant. And there's some other stuff. They got some really cool tools just to kind of, you know, get inspired, find great images and things like that. Oh, look, and now we go into like, look, and you go into the gold palette, and it's just like a whole nother set of like just feel and look, and great tool. It's awesome, and I love it on the iPad, by the way. If you guys haven't checked out, download the Shutterstock app on your iPad. It's gorgeous. It's awesome. Go to shutterstock.com, use promo code Gamebreaker5. So, Mr. Hawks, I know you're a tank, and you're talking about tanks. So tanks are going to be apparently super important in P versus P. Taunts reduce the damage the target player of the target player unless they're attacking the tank. So this is actually really good. I'm going to mention a game now. People are going to go,
how dare you?
It sounds a bit like Star Wars: The Old Republic, but I think it's a good thing in this matter. This is awesome. Does anybody disagree that this is actually a really cool mechanic?
I think it's a really good idea. I mean, Sweater gets a lot of stick, but they did some things actually really right in PvP as well as football, and one of them is that mechanic, is the idea. Okay, what is your role as a tank basically in PvE? It's to protect everybody else. Essentially, that's what you're there to do. You make sure the big thing's punching you in the face rather than everybody else. So in PvP, it kind of gives you a slightly different version of that with our ability. It means that you taunt, and then if they're hitting someone else, they're not taking as much damage, and they're going to be perhaps more effective hitting you instead. So it's kind of a reverse taunt in what it's intended to do. So I like that mechanic. I think it makes sense.
Baron, you were big on the SWTOR PvP. Was this one of the mechanics you actually really liked?
Well, I actually played as a healer, so I did really like it, but I wasn't the one taking all the damage. I think that it's really nice that they're really looking around and looking at other MMOs and seeing, okay, this was a really cool mechanic in there. Let's bring that in and make our game better.
So this next thing is telegraphs, right? Which I think most people on this show know what telegraphs are at this point, watching this show. You know, how they're showing you things on the ground of what to do. But currently, they're not showing telegraphs to players in PvP, which is interesting. So if you want to, if you want to dodge, you're gonna have to know what's coming and all that. And I think initially everybody's gonna go like that. That's the way it should be because it's PvP. But this is huge if the game goes live like this. They could go two directions here. I don't know. I can kind of see pros and cons to both. I don't know. What do you guys? What direction do you guys prefer that they actually go with telegraphs in PvP?
I think there's a reason why telegraphs will not work. I'm sorry. How not having telegraphs in PvP works in WildStar due to the skill shot nature of a lot of what you're doing in PvP. So yeah. So although initially you're saying, well, why I've got it in PvE, why can't I have it in PvP? And that's true, because if you learn the game through PvE and suddenly you walk into PvP and you're getting smashed in the face because you're like, where's it? Where's all the telegraphs gone?
And that's something you brought. That's a really good point, because that's something that they brought up time and time again, is that they feel like they want to use PvE to teach like the players throughout the game how to use telegraphs, and then you jump into PvP and it's like, oh, they're gone.
It can be. I could see it being confusing, especially initially. Anyway, you would eventually realize that, oh, I'm dead. There must be no telegraphs going on here, or or there's something wrong with my monitor. No, I think the fact that it's so skill shot based means that it keeps that. It means that PvP with the telegraphs as well, and you're trying to pull off skill shots, and you're looking out for telegraphs, and doing that so quick and on the fly would be tough, I have to say. They must have tested it and found that it flows better without them. I'm sure at some point telegraphs were evident and they tried it.
Well, I think in the interview that they said that they're still iterating on it, so they're not 100% sure whether or not you're going to be able to see enemy telegraphs or not. You should still be able to, I think, see like your friendly telegraphs, right? Like at least heals. Like you need to know where to stand to get a heal or something like that.
Yeah, they said enemy, and I think I'm pretty sure that it was specifically the opposition's telegraph.
You think they would ever do some sort of like in between, a hybrid of certain Uber abilities or something in PvP, almost like ultimates, like do show telegraphs and other ones don't, things like that kind of have like maybe phases or something to them?
I guess they could, but I think again that would confuse it even more. It's not. It's not. The other thing is, you've got to understand that there are animations that go along with the abilities as well. The characters aren't just standing there in a passive way and things happen. So you should be able to read what's coming from you eventually when you learn the classes and the sort of, glows and everything that are coming off them. It's not like invisible abilities are hitting you if you haven't got telegraphs. So that's going to help. As I said, right now it's hard to tell whether PvP with or without them is better, because A, I haven't played it, and B, they're still working on it. So it is a little odd that as you said, that you're teaching PvP through PvE, and then such a huge part of PvE then just vanishes. So it must be for the fact that it changes up the way that you're playing the PvP so much that it became a negative effect, I guess. But I'm not sure. It's a little confusing, to be honest. I guess
part of me is like super intrigued to try PvP with telegraphs, because it's never been done before, right? So it seems so odd that I'm almost like, can I just try this, please, and see what it's like? Because it kind of sounds like it could be really interesting. I don't know. It just could be it could be terrible. I don't know. Maybe players and people just react way too quickly for like that stuff to really work.
It could be that, and it could also essentially, basically, if you've got a big PvP fight, like a 20-on-20 or a 40 versus 40,
and they're just going off everywhere, and there's lines and things, and
exactly, it just looks like a red and green, quilts being slapped onto the floor or something. It'll just look crazy. I don't know.
Right. I mean, that's part of the reason why in PvE, like in a raid, you can't see like your allies' attacks. Like
Yeah.
because if you see like all these blue telegraphs and then you'll have all the enemies red telegraphs, and I feel really bad. Like I hope that they have some sort of colorblind support, just because I have a lot of friends that are colorblind. And I'm just like thinking about this. It's like, oh, this is going to be a little bit messy, but especially with green and red. But I digress a little bit. They're already, really concerned, and at least in PvE, they can control how many enemy telegraphs there are because they're designing the fights, right? You're not going to have too many enemies putting too many telegraphs on top of each other, at least not in a way that would be incomprehensible at some point. But with PvP, you don't necessarily have that kind of control.
The path system we talked a lot about last show, and the devs are apparently being really, really, really careful with path abilities, as they should. So they basically don't want to make you feel like you're going to have to re-roll. Because, making that an even scarier thing is to get, is if you get it wrong, paths unlock abilities in PvP. So I see, I have a crystal ball, guys, and I can see the future, and I can see a very angry forum section, lots of tears. Do you see it as well? A lot of people who.
Well, you just do anyway. Let's face it. You could be talking about anything, and you can foresee that happening. But yeah, as soon as you start putting that kind of, especially when because paths are such an important part of your PvE content, and they add so much to there's such a variation to the game itself based on which path you choose. If you then make say a top end path ability in PvP accidentally unbalanced in a way that you didn't foresee, which always happens. Like there's always something we'll say Guild Wars 2, Mesmer teleport. Like that is it's crazy how the effect that had. So what I would say is that I'm sure there will be a point where one of the paths will need to have adjustments made to it for one of its abilities, because that's balancing in that MMO.
I mean, this is like the racial skills thing in other MMOs, except now they're just calling it something else. Like, and I don't actually see why they don't take the same approach that they did with racial skills, because one thing that they do have racial skills in this game, but the way that they approach it is that those skills are unlockable to everyone. It's just that a certain race might have an easier time unlocking that ability. So like a Granok, being all made of rocks and strong and everything, he'll have an easier time getting strength-based skills or strength-based, stats or whatever it is. But he could still go get like some sort of speed-based ability or something like that. It just might be easier for an Orin because, they're like these people and they have an easier time running around. So I don't see why they don't do something similar for paths as far as abilities go. Like, keep the content separate, but then make the ability something so that if you really feel like you need that, then you can maybe give up your ability and take that ability or something like that. Some sort of choice that you have to work towards it or something.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, the other thing here is the big question too is will they be listing all the path abilities like that you can get at character creation? I mean, of course there'll be websites that open that stuff up fairly quickly to go looked at, but I think a lot of people could be. I think a lot of people could be worried about this because the moment you have to start worrying about your abilities, the path system could slightly start falling apart.
Yeah, it is a real delicate balance they've got to strike with the design of this, because as I said, as soon as you start having a very specific content path and then cross it over into PvP, there are just always issues. It happens. So it's about implementation and about the reiteration when they have those problems. But that's the joys of MMOs, and things go wild. I just had a thought actually. How many people are going to end up having, say, a Cassian Esper, who's 4 of them? Like, so they've got the same character and class, but with different paths.
With different paths, all 4 paths.
I can really see people do. I love this class and I love this race, but I want to try the other path, so I'm going to do the exact same one 4 times. I can really see. That's actually a bit of a stroke of genius there, because you can really see people just like filling up those character slots even with the same characters and races, the same classes and races.
There's an offensive PvP stat and a defensive one, which is probably going to limit.
Power!
Yeah, probably. It's obviously going to limit how effective PvP players can be in PvP content or PvE content, excuse me, and vice versa. I don't know, Farhan. What do you think? Good, bad? Wait and see.
I'm actually sort of a fan of being able to take, like, because I actually do like to raid, and so I'm a sort of a fan of being able to use my gear from raiding in PvP. but like I know most people don't like that. Well, I also like being able to use PvP gear to do PvE, like, so then PvEers will now hate me because.
Sure. But is it like you just like seriously like hardcore PvPers? Like if you turn up after doing a raid 1 week and you've got better gear than they have, they really do not like you and start throwing things in a general direction. So it feels cumbersome having to have these different stats, but the reason it crops up again and again in games is because the alternative causes a lot of people to get really angry if they feel that if they are completely PvP focused and they feel that someone can be as powerful or in fact more powerful from PvE content, they tend to go up the wall when that happens. So yeah, it's not surprising that that's included.
Looks like add-ons and macros will definitely be in the game. So very much looking like that's all good to go. Everybody can be happy about that. WoW players rejoice. 10v10 and 15v15 battlegrounds are in the game already, and 30 versus 30 is actually being tested. Does size matter? There's the question. Does size matter?
Yes,
of course.
30
I think if we 30 versus 30 sort of battleground style stuff sounds good. It sounds like as long as you can, and you'll be able to, I'm sure, choose which tier you want to enter for. You're not just going to go random. Oh, I'm in a 30 this time. So if you're just one of the people you like the sort, if you like being a group of friends, say a 10 person guild, and go and do sort of like real finely tuned that sort of thing. I'm not sure if we can do that yet, but I would imagine so. If you can go in as a group, then that's great. If you want to go in and just have fun and it's big and loud and mental, then you're going to go for your 30 versus 30, and that's cool. It's good to have that as an option, I think.
Unranked battlegrounds are not going to be match made, but in ranked battlegrounds, there's actually going to be an elo system, very much like League of Legends, if you're familiar with that, which it's basically like a personal ranking on your ladder. You basically can improve that. You know what's really interesting about this though? Like, I mean, so in theory, I like again that idea, but isn't it kind of interesting that Riot has decided to hide your elo rating as of late? Like they don't show it anymore. So I'm wondering if they've seen the negative effects of displaying your elo rating over time, and it's caused so much sort of tension and I think drama that they've actually hidden it now. I think there's still ways to find it out, but it's not like it used to be. So
I think the way they've gone with it is they've gone for the tiered league system. So it's more so instead of it being this, what it was before was, your elo's 2 points below mine, so you suck, or which is the way some people responded to it. Now it is more league. It feels more like League of Legends in that there's a path towards being like pro. So instead of just having a number, you go up in the league. So I can understand why for League of Legends that makes a lot of sense, especially sort of to sort of focus that, start off beginner player all the way to being at the World Championships or whatever. That sort of path towards that makes sense. But for Elo, if you don't know what Elo is, basically it's a mathematical invention by a chess player to basically over time statistically figure out how good a player you are. and by doing that, it means that you get matchmaking with people who should be around the same ability as you are. So it's better fights. You're not more likely to walk into places and get ruffle stomped every time that you get into any sort of battleground. So for WildStar, I think it makes a lot of sense because it's about the matchmaking rather than the League, which is completely about that style of progression.
I think one of the really cool things about what they've said about the elo system in WildStar, or at least their intentions are for matchmaking, is that because of the rallying mechanic, where your gear is sort of powered up, it's really similar to bolstering in Star Wars. I think it's what it was called, where while you were leveling up in Star Wars, your gear level was boosted to your max level. And so you could sort of compete regardless of what your level was. So they have rallying in WildStar, which is very similar, where you still don't have abilities unlocked that you would have normally gotten as you leveled up, but your gear level is boosted. Now, one thing that they've said that they're going to do for Battlegrounds is that they're also going to, within the match, they're going to be rallying everyone up to an equal gear level as well. So it makes for a very interesting situation where it's like, okay, so you have like your PvP gear progression, but you might not actually even see like a very big jump in your stats until you pass into another league or into another bracket of gear. So the elo actually has like a lot of meaning in terms of where your stats are going to be when you're actually in a match because of the whole rallying thing.
This next up, this is going to put a little bit of sad face on people. No persistent battlegrounds that last for days on end. So for you WoW fans, like no Alterock Valley, an old Warcraft, they have zero interest in making anything like that. So sad. But so let's see, arenas are going to be 2v2, 3v3, and 5v5. But it is not a standard elimination format. So check this out. Each team has a certain amount of lives, and when a player dies, they use up a life. What do you guys think of this approach? I mean, they're also open to other game types. They said like single elimination, things like that, but this is a little different.
I really, really, really like this. This is really just, it's sort of like just mind blowing to me when I first heard about it. I was like, that's so cool. Like, yeah, because for a number of reasons, the biggest one for me is that because I like playing as like not necessarily DPS when I'm doing PvP. Like I like playing as a tank or a healer while I'm PvPing. It sort of brings a lot of value to a tank now because you're not going to be taking away as many lives from your team because you're going to so much harder to kill. So you have a lot more time in order to sort of help your team when you're doing that, and also just because like the strategy gets a lot deeper when you're sort of like, okay, this person is our person that's probably going to be dying a lot. That's okay. He can do some cool stuff while he's up, and then you have other players who sort of have to balance your composition in I think, a much cooler way.
Scott, what do you think?
I think what it gives you the opportunity for is a bit more back and forth in games. So like, if you have just like one dies, and then it's 5v4, usually that snowballs very quickly. If you can have back and forth where someone can come back in, then like that team can play really defensively, waiting for their person to come back, and then go again. So it means that the matches are much more back and forth. There'll be more ebb and flow within games rather than things snowballing very quickly and being over. So I think it's going to actually hopefully should make for more interesting games. And if you are just like nowhere near as good as the other side, they're just going to slaughter you anyway. Because as soon as you come back in, everybody else is going to be dead, and then they're going to wipe you out. So when it's like that, when there's a real imbalance between the skill of the two sides, you'll still see quick games. But when it's more evenly balanced, should see longer games and more games with more strategy, more back and forward, and the team taking different sort of approaches at different times of the match. So I think I think it's a really good idea and adds a lot of complexity and sort of like strategy to what you're doing.
All right, finally, before we move on, probably the coolest thing ever. The ability to morph into a deer that farts rainbows.
Oh, yeah.
Best game ever. We actually know where it's from, right, Scott?
Yeah, that's the Esper projected spirit ability, is what that is, which means that everybody's going to be an Esper now. Yeah, you're going to have different sort of travel, like movement's huge, and so different movement abilities, and that. One of the things the Esper do, if you don't know what the Esper is, Esper's ESP, extrasensory perception, sort of mind powers, and they can produce, as was mentioned earlier, the idea of these like Psy Blades, they're called. If you're a fan of X-Men, if you've ever seen Psylocke, and yeah, basically that's it. But one of the things they can do, we had an interview with Hugh Shelton, who's a lead class designer, and Gareth Harmer Gazimov on ZAM spoke to him, and he says, yeah, one of the cool abilities is a deer that you can turn into a deer if you're an Esper and move quickly while farting a rainbow. So, there you go.
Best game ever. All right. StrategyInformer.com spoke with design producer Stefan Frost. First up, he said, over the course of the game, you'll probably get around 50 abilities or so, and you have to pick 6 to 8 of those to use while you're playing the game. So if I was a warrior, I could be a tank and choose those abilities, or I could switch those out and become a DPS instead. It'll make things like finding groups for dungeons easier because there won't be anything like, oh, you're not a tank, get out. Or you're not a DPS, get out. Stuff like that. So basically that deck building approach, to classes, this is really taken off as of recently. I think we talked a little bit about this. I think we're all kind of fans. I'm a fan of this deck building system.
Definitely.
Okay. Having 4 hotbars full of abilities like all over the screen and side just feels kind of old school at this point. I think streamlined, and I think it helps add a little bit more skill to the game, hopefully, as well, that you can build your deck correctly and kind of like play your class correctly, and you're limited.
And you have to sit and think about what combinations work together and choose them and make that the focus of what you're doing in advance or at the time that you're doing it. What it comes down to is that what makes MMOs for me work is when you have choices that are interesting and have consequences. So having a deck building system with your abilities means that you automatically have choices and they have consequences on you like constantly. So that to me that's more interesting.
And you could be a super special little snowflake. So of all 3 of us, are the exact same class. We have the pool of same abilities, but we're probably going to pick all different ones, and we probably don't have.
You'll have, say, if you went to a certain website and looked up and built your deck out if you wanted to. I don't know, maybe you're going to have builds, but you still have the option if you want. You can try things and experiment yourself. If you want to choose to go, I want to go with a cookie cutter build or go with that build, fine. But if you want to go with different combinations, I like that more and being set into your choices rather than having 50 or 60, like some like Sweater and World of Warcraft, like the amount of buttons you've got on the screen at once. It's amazing. I played the Old Republic not that long ago, and it had been a while, and I put up my bars and I started sorting out my UI, and I'm like, oh, I need more hotbars. There's more abilities now. I need I need another hotbar. And by the end of it, I was just, okay, this is a little overwhelming. Eventually you sort of learn all of them again, but really I'd rather have a limited choice, just because I feel that again, the choices matter, and you have to think about it more than just knowing everything and being able to do anything whenever you feel like it, whenever you want.
And I think, Farhan, the one thing that we learned back in the day when we used to do a show called Buildcast together was, it was all Guild Wars 2 PvP and theory crafting stuff, was you and Togger would both sort of suggest a lot of times sort of different builds for different types of players. So there were builds that were really good for newer players who really needed to start getting their feet wet and learn. And then you could kind of progress on to more complex builds and actually much more complex gameplay, which you kind of only get that by, I think, like limiting yourself like this with the deck system.
Yeah. I think also just one thing that's going to be really important for WildStar in particular, in having a limited action set, is that if you really have to have really good control over your movement, like you're going to be targeting your freeform targeting like we were talking about earlier. You don't want to have to do finger gymnastics to have to hit all of your Control Shift 6 while turning and jumping, double jumping. So, it's going to be really helpful for WildStar in particular, particularly for people who don't have your special mouses with 1,000 keys on them.
Yeah, I think what it does that way as well. It's got two main advantages: one from the player and one for the developer. From the player, a lot of the information is going to be through telegraphs and what's going on in the game. So you don't want to be having to, you don't want a screen that's just full of buttons. You want to be focused on the game. So if you've got a deck size, a smaller deck sort of build of abilities, it's much easier for especially beginner players to wrap their heads around and be able to still look at the screen rather than spending all the time saying, okay, it's in the top left-hand corner, that ability I need for this. All right, then that's good. So that helps. And from the developer side, for balance, it helps. That you've got to figure out certain combinations there that work with each other. If you've only got a limited amount of combinations at the same time, it helps a little when you're balancing things, that rather than having all 50 on your screen at the same time, and the player having access to all of them, because then you got to see if 12 different abilities might sort of work differently with each other at the same time, and it just gets crazy, I would imagine. So I think that'll help as well.
All right, this next statement is going to get a lot of people's brains a churning. Finally, Stefan said this. He said, paths in PvP are different, and we'll talk about that in the coming weeks. But moreover, those paths will have something beneficial to do in PvP, and those systems will be a little bit different. I don't know. We know that paths abilities will be usable in PvP, but it doesn't it read like there's something a lot more to this than that? Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like there's gameplay that has to do with paths. Like you're going to actually have your settlers building something in the middle of a match or something, which I don't know, that sort of frightens me a little bit, just because of now, all the more so our conversation that we had earlier about paths affecting what you sort of feeling like you have to go with a certain path in order to be good. But I would really worry if they tied it too much into the actual gameplay for PvP.
Going to be interesting. Not sure. It does open up some interesting ideas, like you said, building things, having people defend things, and I don't know.
Well, war plots open themselves up to that quickly, because the idea of war plots are essentially based around building things on them. So I guess you could have path involved in that.
All right, next up, Massively spoke to Jeremy Gaffney. They talked a bit about gathering. Jeremy had this to say. Keep in mind that Explodium is a temporary name. Explodium blows up when you hit it. If you're fighting a monster near it and hit it with your spells, it will damage you and the monster. Another example is when you're picking at a small rock, and it turns out that the mineral is attached to the back of a large bug that runs away. Now you have to chase it down, knocking materials off it. Or perhaps a creature made from the material swallows you, and then you have to knock through the creature's stomach to escape while harvesting.
I think we've seen a glimpse of that creature, actually. There's a movement video where he's just hammering on a pretty standard-looking node, and then in a split second there's a 40-foot like worm leaps up out of the ground and snarls over the top of him. So it's all going to have that kind of sense of humor that is associated with WildStar. Like it's going to permeate every little piece of the game, and it looks like the Gathering's no exception to that.
First and foremost, I'm watching chat room, and they agree. I think all three of us may agree that Explodium needs to stay.
Yes,
that's full of wind. Just leave that.
Explodium or Kaboomian. it's got to be
Maybe they can just put
kaboomium.
both.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think we want explodium and kaboomium. I like that.
Explodium and kaboomium, definitely. Okay. Secondly, this is so cool because I mean, I am sick of clicking on a node and just like waiting and wasting 5 seconds of my life while I hear the chink sound. Chink, chink, okay, done. Let's do it again. Chink. All right, done. I've got something to do. And third, I guess the one thing that really kind of we could discuss is how do you guys think that this will affect like gold farming bots? I think this could hopefully have a real it's a real deterrent, right? I mean, how are they going to combat some of these things when there's all these unknown things that could sort of make it harder for them?
Well, for a start, I've just thought of this, and it's off memory, so if I'm wrong, don't throw things at me and don't swear at me, because that's just rude and I'm fragile. But I think I talked about nodes don't just spawn in the same place like they do in most games, but the nodes will spawn in different places around the map. It's not just a one-track thing. I think they said that. So for a start, that makes it more problematic for botters. But also, it's a bit more problematic when you write your program to go and you start hitting it, and then it runs away from you or eats you. So it might be making it a bit more involved and complex and fun, of course. Makes it more difficult for gold farming. Yeah, fun. I like fun. It's good in games, I find. It's supposed to be the point. Sometimes games forget that. But yeah. So hopefully that will be a deterrent, or at least make things a little harder for those horrible people.
Moving on to crafting. Jeremy had this to say. He said, we're trying to avoid things like make 17 bronze hammers and 12 golden swords. Thank God. We have questing, but we want it to be more like achievement type advancement. I can't go into too deep, but we think it's a fun system. Finished up by saying, let me put it like this. You're growing a garden of plants on the grounds of your housing plot. Maybe sometimes you wake up and you get some rare blooms, or maybe you've managed to grow a creature that tries to kill you. We want trade skills to involve you more than just sitting in an auction house and doing the same thing over and over again. Again, sounds like so much fun and engaging. I don't know.
Fun.
There's one thing I cannot stand about crafting. It's like make X of these. And it's like and then when you want to level up your crafting, basically you just go to a website and you look up and it's like, okay, make 600 of these. You need this much of this, and this, and you buy it all the auction house and you just sit there and like let it just spam make it. There's nothing fun about it. And then you just
it's useful to have wherever you're doing your crafting next to a vendor. Because that's all you're going to ever do with any of this, unless you can reconstitute what you're making, which you can in some games. But a lot of the time, what you do is you make it and then you vendor it, because the putting it on the auction house would just be like a waste of time. Because nobody wants it.
No, because everybody else has done the same thing. They've done it all. Now, the other thing that's a side note here that's actually is also makes it sound like your house is going to be a huge core part of the game, where they really want to make it not just a side thing, but they actually want to make it useful, which I think is awesome.
And it's housing is one of the things that makes WildStar stand apart from MMOs of a similar ilk. So, especially one MMO of a similar ilk. So, having housing is nice, but there are games that have housing, and it's like, yeah, I've got a house that I visit every now and again when I've forgot what else I was going to do, and it's there. And I have a chest where I put a few things in, and that's nice. And some people like to decorate it and so on. But have housing that actually matters makes it an intrinsic part of the game. And as I said before, they want it to be, in many ways, the heart of the game. So it's good that we've got housing that has some importance to you, because if not, it becomes tertiary. And why spend all the time making such a design? You spend all that time making a system that isn't really important. I don't understand that.
Well, from everything that we've seen with WildStar, it seems like they absolutely are hitting it home that that's not the case with WildStar. They've built the housing mechanism, whole system into the game that seems like a very integral part of it. You're going to be doing a lot of stuff there. I don't think it's just going to be like some side note.
Not at all.
Last time, I don't know if we talked about it here or if it was on This Week in MMO. I can't remember. Do you guys remember reading about finding maps out in the world that would open up locations?
Yes.
In your house.
We talked about it on Twemo. Yeah.
We talked about it on Twemo. So they're actually able to find maps out in the open world that are going to open up locations on your housing plot. So like you might find the map, go back to your housing plot, and there'll be like a mine shaft that you can harvest, like, you know, once you've cleared
Goblins
monsters out and things like that. So again, making your housing plot like change, feel more dynamic, things to do. Can I get a beta key? Maybe. Seriously. You know the other thing, really quick side note. Have you guys felt like the like sort of undercurrent of hype? Not hype, just the excitement, I should say. It's not hype. The undercurrent excitement for WildStar has ramped up so much in the past few weeks. It's actually really interesting.
There's a lot of people, and people who were on the bandwagon before I was. I have to say. I mean, I've been looking forward to the game for quite a while now, but there were people there from like day one who have been waiting for everybody else to kind of realize what the game is, and people are now, and more, and it's gathering steam, and it's really rolling down now, and a lot of people realizing this could be a whole lot of fun. Fun's the operative word for today's show.
Zam.com. Go over to Zam.com. Scott Hawks, editor-in-chief over at Zam.com. Go check it out. Go over to Zam. Not 3 Zams, just 1 Zam.com. And follow Scott on the Twitter at Jarimor, Jarimor. Farhan, I totally screwed up your lower third again this week. It's wrong. I forgot to change it. It's Unindel. UN.
Yeah, add an extra N right here.
Yeah, add an N. UNINDEL. I will fix that. I apologize. I completely that is my fault. You can follow me at Gary again and follow Gamebreaker TV at Gamebreaker TV, and go check out our brand new website called free2play.tv. Don't miss that one. Free to TO, not the number 2. TO. Free2play.tv. We'll do this show live every single Monday at 1 PST, so come on over for the live show. We'll see you next time.